Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the ComicBase Livestream. I am your host, Pete Bickford, and for the next hour, give or take, we're going to be talking about doom, destruction, and really bad things. So anyway, let me kill my mic just a little bit. I feel like I'm a little hot on the levels here. Hopefully, let's knock that down just a little bit. But yeah, no. This is the Embrace the Suck show, especially after the lost episode of last 149 there, where even the technical levels of Doom were so high that even I couldn't stand it, and decided it was best to leave that one as a forgotten issue. But anyway, want to say hi to everyone here, and then we'll get into the whole thing. I'm actually going to, sorry for the false advertising slightly. I'm going to start with a little bit of good news, but after that, it's just going to be all just bad things. And this is our special Halloween-ish type episode. But anyways, I want to say hi to folks out here. Jet City Comics, first in the door. Robbie Weinberg. This is a good deal on the Batman screenshot. Yes, we aim to please. Greg Hex joins us, our mod from South Jersey. Looks like things are the weather's shaping up for people around the place. Mike Beam, who by the way was the lucky winner of the what should we call it, the copy of PC Gamer subscription. He's in the chat today. Andre, welcome. Doug Wren. Doug has a question about the barcode sale that we just kicked off. Says, I have Manhattan barcode scanner. Do I need or should I upgrade to the latest and greatest? The compelling reason to upgrade to the later ones, two things. One is just convenience. Especially if you're going for the wireless one, it's just darned handy just being able to pick up something like this, no cords attached, and just not worry about knocking on the ground and all the other things that the old one did. That's one, and the other one is it works with a wider range of codes than the original barcode scanner we had from like 15 years back. So it will do things like it'll scan the new Coda barcodes on that ComicBase produces these days. It handles all the USPS shipping codes. It'll scan QR codes and so forth. But if your older one's working fine for you, then by all means, keep going with it. We tend to source things that are built like tanks around here. So if it's still working, there's a lot to be said for just stick with what's working. All right, and let's see here. And Mike says thanks for the magazine. All right, cool. We are good to go. And for some reason, I'm not sure why the looks like the okay there's. Sorry, StreamYard put a little interface change up in the whole thing, and they're making it so that they no longer show if I have comments up unless I have the screen much bigger than I had it just now. So, all right, noted. Moving on. All right. So getting on to the badness of the, actually, no, let's get on to the good stuff first. First of all, the news. From our neck of the woods, infrastructure is kind of like the watchword of the day. We are, if you walk past our server room now, it sounds like marching ants, in there, because it's like, because there's like disks hammering over constantly right now. As I mentioned last time out, we put something like 200 terabytes online of storage for things that we're going to be doing soon, which involve a lot of storage. Plus, we also whatever we are thinking of doing, we also need to have twice that because we need to be able to back it up. But yes, we got a couple of new big NAS arrays online. We have various other network and other upgrades going on. Be aware this weekend in particular, servers might be down for a couple of minutes now and then. Won't be, if they're down for like 5-10 minutes, but we got to be able to install some new hardware in there. So we're going to try to do it during Slack times, but one thing I've learned is that there is no such thing as a dead time on ComicBase and Atomic Avenue. Something's going on at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday. But we'll try to do it in a time where it disrupts the least number of people, and it will be a short intermission. So if you have any trouble, just have yourself a cup of coffee and then come back, and then we should be all good to go. Let me see here. And Greg says, for those of you who are new to the live stream, enter freely and of your own will, and maybe leave some of your happiness behind. Yes, because we'll wrench it right out of you. All right. Anyway, other things that are going on. ComicBase is up to build 990 of ComicBase 2024. You say, what is new with build 990? And we updated the notes on the betas on the whole thing. The basic one, and this is largely instigated by Mr. Rob Weinberg, is we have better integration with the Grand Comics database. It does a better job of searching where there are funny punctuation characters in the thing. There's a couple of things that help us on the back end, but that's the most user visible change on that one. So if you do work with the Grand Comics database, by all means upgrade to that one, and I think you'll find it searches better. If you still have trouble with anything, making the link between ComicBase and their database, let us know. We're always interested in making that as smooth as we can. All right, other things that are going on in the universe, and now I think I'm going to switch over to the other computer over here. Yes. One thing I talked about last time out about that I was a little bummed about is that two big tech releases had come and gone that I was really waiting for, and both of them were a complete snooze fest. Both the new iPhone, which it's titanium, but other than that, there's absolutely no compelling reason to move from the last couple of iPhones to it. And then the other one, which was even more stunning to me, was the iPhone 14. Not the iPhone 14, but the Intel 14th generation chips were just released, and they are an absolute snooze fest. They have nothing. I mean, it's like a 10-12% bump in speed. Crazy. Everything else is just about the same. So it's a minor clock refresh is about the only thing you can say about them. But on the other end of things, some good news came into the universe today. Qualcomm is they previewing their Snapdragon X Elite silicon chips, or SoCs. Basically, they're making a big ARM play. ARM is a competing chip technology to the Intel AMD end of things. Very influential to the Apple M1, M2, M3 silicon that they've been putting out there. And most interestingly about the whole thing is it does a hell of a lot of performance with not a hell of a lot of power, unlike Intel and AMD, which seem to be like they're in a race to see who can melt the house down the fastest. But the new Qualcomm chips out there, the Snapdragon X, it looks pretty damn good. These are just previews, mind you, at this point. But both in the single-threaded and the multi-threaded cores on the whole thing, these things look like absolute barn burners. And they are comparing very nicely against both the i7s from Intel and also the M2 chips from Apple. So the other thing that's out this one, and by the way, I'll try to post a link to the article on this one. This is from Tech. I never knew how to say that. A really good hardware site. Them and Tom's Hardware, I think, are the best hardware sites on the whole internet. But does a pretty good rundown of what's new, different on the whole thing. By the way, the I/O story on these new chips is amazing. USB 4. If all you guys are sick of USB 1.3.0, 3.1, 3.2. USB 4 built-in separate lanes for everything. PCI Express 4. Also, a lot of good support up and down the chipsets, not just borrowing pipes from other places on the board like Intel's been doing. And discrete Wi-Fi 7. So again, it's got its own lanes. It doesn't have to steal from the capabilities of the rest of the machine. And this could wind up being a really exciting generation of, strangely enough, laptop and similar hardware going out in the world. In terms of performance. So these are expected mid-year, so mid-2024, and I'm really looking forward to it. Like I say, I'll try to put a link in the article, but I think that is pretty cool. And Pizza's site says build 900. Yes, I think I said 990. I meant 900. I apologize for that one. That's a typo on my side, Andre. All right, that is the good news on the hardware thing. And then the other thing that's coming out there is the M3s are expected to be released from Apple on a special spooky October surprise, which is a thing that Apple, I guess, is doing. But they found a way to, I don't know, ghostify up the little Apple logo for their little spooky interview preview. They're expecting to release some kind of desktop refresh for their machines. I don't think anyone's really expecting it to turn a lot of heads, but hey, maybe we'll be surprised. Apple's been, strangely enough, in the driver's seat on the silicon end for the last couple of generations, I'm going to say. And it'll be interesting to see if they come up with anything else that makes us want to pay the premium that tends to come with Apple hardware. So, all right, so that is the good news of that one. And so now let's get on to the death and destruction. All right. So let's first of all talk about variants. I am going to try to do a larger deep dive into this one when I get into more of the publisher financials on this one, I'm honestly at this point, I'm hitting up sources both in the press and in the industry. Basically, we're putting out little data swap deals where I'm trying to find harder information, because if you try to find hardcore publisher information on where comics stand in the grand scheme of these vast multimedia conglomerates that are the Marvel, Marvel, DC. Marvel is part of Disney. Disney is a massive multimedia and parks and entertainment thing. Comics from Marvel are a rounding error on their spreadsheet. They don't even appear in the balance sheet. They don't appear in the income statement. If you pull any of their official financials and try to drill down on comics, unless you guys have better sources than I do, I'm really curious to see what happens. I've heard meta reporting on where things stand, but honestly, I would very much, if anyone's listening to this one and wants to swap data, I'm very interested in the publisher aspect of some of these topics I'm going to talk about, where they are talking about the financial impact of some of these things. But I'm going to talk now about the consumer impact of some of the bigger trends in comics, and it has been absolutely devastating. Comics right now are really plagued by a lack of good solid data on what's selling, what's not selling. There's all this tea leaf reading. It's like, well, yeah, we got a POS system that like 50 people use, and that's a big one. So let's extrapolate from the 50 people who use that, and not thinking that they might be atypical at all. We used to, when comics was centralized through Diamond Comics distribution, we used to have pretty good numbers coming out of them. That has not been true for the better part of a decade now. And no one's really sharing data. But one thing that is very clear when I talk to comic retailers and when I just observe the situation on the ground, is that comic books as a collectible are nothing like new comics are nothing like the collectible they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, etc. New comic sales are being completely cannibalized at this point by variants. So what we're doing is we're selling lots and lots of copies of comics to hardcore collectors who, meantime, there's this insane, it's almost like Pogs or rare Pokemon type of game, where if you take delivery of massive numbers of relatively common variants, you get a chance at the upper scale ones, which you hope to God you can sell out enough of a increase to make the whole exercise worth it, and that somehow marketing on a national level, your local comic store might be able to blow out these expensive variants which justify the churning of so much of the regular stock, and honestly the burning out of your regular customer base. So this is a terrible trend. I want to throw some numbers behind it from what I can get, and just to give you an idea of how big this trend is. Let me flip over to did a little bit of a dig here before the show. And you guys have all seen a while back, we did a breakdown of the variance over time. So we went from basically the 40s and 50s. Variance existed almost entirely as a price variant, or usually a regional price variant or a distributor price variant. That would be the only variant you'd ever see. It wasn't really until the 70s where sometimes you had, like, say, the Gold Key versus Whitman covers of a particular comic book, and really the 90s when the idea of variants really took off. Lately, however, I ran the numbers for October, and I gotta say, I'm absolutely disturbed by these numbers. So I'm going to go and I'm going to hide some of the sheet here if you didn't happen to grab it ahead of time, and I'm just going to walk backward in time from now. So the first thing I'm highlighting over here is the month. This is how many comic books we know that were published in the month of October, or with October cover dates. These aren't street dates, these are cover dates. This is the number next to it, is the number that weren't variants. So out of 1,461 comics published in October 2023, only 150 weren't variants. So in other words, regular comic books with October cover dates are 10%, 10.3% of the market, for a total of 89.7% of the different item numbers, the different issues that were published, were a variant of one sort or another. This is insane, guys. I don't know another way to put this. And it's been getting worse. You go back to September, 1,453 books published, 201 of them were variants, for a total of 13.8% were normal, 86% variants, 87% were variants the month before, 87% the month before that, 83%, back if we go down to June, and then we were down to 80% if we go back to May, but we're basically 80% all the way through the rest of the year when going back to January 2023. 4 out of 5 comic books that are put out in the US these months are variants of one sort or another. All right, let's take a really close look, though, at these numbers. 1,700 different comics published, 1,600, 1,800 different comics published. Again, of which only 210 are unique comics, or 201 are unique comics. But obviously, in this vast number of comic books on the left here are a great many comics that just came out that never had a non-variant version. They came out in A editions, B editions, C editions, etc. So let's go back in time and say, where did this problem start? And let's step back through the years a little bit here. January 2022. So we're backing up a year, right? So let's flip back to January of this year. 1,700, comics published. 350 were regular, meaning that 20% were regular, or 80% were variants. We go back to January 2022. It's a little better. You were basically at about 1 in 4 instead of 1 in 5 were a non-variant cover. 1,560 comics published, 354 were variants. Go back a year before that one, and things are looking quite a bit better. You're running up close to 30% are regular issues of one sort or another. Go back another year, and you are at a third are regular comic books. Go back 5 years from that, and suddenly, hey, now we've just tipped over, so just over half the comic issues that were published in 2015 are variants of one sort or another. Everything else is a normal comic book. And by the way, look at our total number of comic books that we're publishing in these entire months here. So if I add this number to this number, you're winding up with a number that's about between 1,500 and 1,600 on the whole thing. So we're greatly inflating the number of comic books that you're basically kind of expecting someone to buy if they're a really diehard comic book collector. But this has not always been thus. Go back 5 years from that, and now you're back at around 1,300 comic books comprise the entirety of the month, and 2/3 of those are regular comic books. Only a third of them, really less than a third, are variants. 5 years before that, 83% of the comic books were regular comic books. And by the way, I'm sorry, I did that previous number wrong. The way to get the total number of comic books is this number minus that number. It's not that number plus that number. Sorry, it's easy to get confused with this one. So basically, in 2015, there were about, honestly, for regular comic books, really you're talking about a number that's like 622 regular comic books, 600-ish regular comic books, 525 regular comic books. Now, when we go back, let's go, one of the games that we play in my household is, when we look around at the world today, is especially, and I get this, I don't know if you guys get this, when I watch old movies, I ask myself, exactly when did we enter Clown World? Or when did the Great Schism occur, where we went from the world's coolest timeline that I felt like we were clearly on in the 80s, people were getting along, music was good, people were interested in succeeding and doing neat things and making money and having a good time, and the races were not at each other's throats. Basically, America was getting along pretty good, and things were good. 90s still, I thought like that was a dour decade, but still, you could relate to everything. Not everyone's at each other's throats, and now suddenly we are in Clown World. So if you look at the state of where we were then, and again, it's just, if you ever watch like old movies, it kills you, especially if it's anything that involves things like office discussions, where it's like, oh yes, and now we have to run to HR and talk to someone about this. The sorts of things that you would run to HR about in 2005 were not the sort of things you would run to HR about in 2023. So a popular discussion in my house is, when did we enter Clown World? And as near as I can figure, and the causes could be anything. It's but somewhere between 2005. I get this from watching older episodes of Project Greenlight, where Hollywood people are trying to make movies, and they're very, very concerned about how to get the right, talent in there who really knows how to move the camera and really knows how to write the right script and things like that. And then by 2008, the next season, because they'd been delayed by a little bit in Project Greenlight, the same guys involved with the whole thing were in meetings where they were talking about having the people with the right color and not offending someone's sensibility about this, that, and the other thing, and the movie be damned. It's like, oh, okay. Somewhere in there, it seems like, is where we took the wrong turn on the path from where things were going well to when they were going badly. And if we look back into the comic market on variants, somewhere in 2010, 827 different issues were published. 577 were real comic books. 70%. And I remember 2010. This is after Image. This is after Valiant. This is after all the things that were beating us up as collectors and making them think you're chiseling us for our wallet. Like you can't believe. 2005. Out of 841 comics published that month, only 700 of them. 700 of them were actual comic books, like real comic books, putting out, real stories that were different from each other, not just the cover. 83% were real comic books as opposed to just copies of copies. 2000, pretty similar numbers, actually. We didn't really have this huge exponential growth of the variant curve until, again, somewhere along the line where we entered Clown World. I'm going to say somewhere in the horrific decade between semi-decade or whatever you call it, between 2005 and 2010, someone said, hey, you know what? That thing that we've been doing, let's really start doing it hard. But if you go back to 2000, basically 90% of the comics were real comics. They weren't just copies of copies. Go back a decade from that, 97.9% of the comics were real comics. So there were 536 comics published in January of 1990, which, with, I believe, an average cover price in 1990 of what, $1? What was the average comic that we were all buying back then, running? But if you wanted to buy every single comic that was being published in January 1990, it didn't set you back your mortgage. Again, the variance, and this is in the decade that, between 1990 and 2000, this is the decade that would give us the whole concept of variance with, Image Comics and silver foil covers and gold covers and nude covers and everything else. That all happened between 1990 and 2000, but it wasn't nearly that bad in the first decade. We had, basically you had a 10% pollution of the market with variants, if you want to call it that, or adulteration of the flow. Going back to 1980, honestly, it was actually a little bit worse. These are probably price variants for the most part. Very, very rare in the 80s to see an actual authentic variant. Going back to the 70s, same kind of deal. You're at 98% of the comic books are not variants, and you can go back from there. But rolling forward in time, particularly after 2005, things picked up speed in a hurry, to the point now where we're looking at, in October of this year, where only 10% of the comics released are new comics. They're comics that aren't a copy of a copy. 89% of them are variants on one side. The cover prices have absolutely exploded. And it's clear at this point that we've really become addicted as a market to the idea that we're going to punch this variant thing to the wall. I mean, it's the economics of doing variants are such that if people are out there and willing to buy them, you get to pull a couple of different tricks as a maker of comic books. One is you can reuse cover art using different plates, different sketch cover, trade dress cover versus virgin cover. It's all right. You can stretch your existing art to get 3 or 4 different covers out of the same thing. If all you're paying for at the printing press is an ink swap or a plate swap, you're talking about, I can produce a variant for a couple $300. If I've even got to draw new art, I'm not just tinting the old art. I'm not just doing a red cover, blue cover, red, green cover sort of thing. If I got to pay for a brand new cover, $500 will get you a cover from most journeyman cover artists today. 1,000 from the guys who are really good, and if you want to pay 2,000, you could probably get Alex Ross. So you've got that going for you. And then the other thing you can do, and if you do pay the 2000 to get Alex Ross, you probably also get about 3 versions of him out of it, because you got his sketches, you got his fully painted ones, you've got his virgin cover with or without the trade dress and so forth. So again, you say 2000, but that doesn't mean, even like a guy at Alex Ross's level, doesn't mean that he cost you $500 per cover. The other thing you can do on this one, obviously, is you can also play the Kino version of it, where you say, for every X copies of the A, B, or C cover, I will allow you to buy 1 copy of the D cover. For every 25 copies of this one, I'll let you buy the E cover. For every 50 copies, I'll let you buy the F cover, etc. And then what you're hoping for, and by the way, all these covers, cost essentially the same amount of money to print. You only printed 1 page that was different from all the others. So as a publisher, this thing feels like a freaking gold mine. Why wouldn't you push this as far as you possibly could? And to the retailers who've adjusted to it, who've managed to keep a shop open in these very trying circumstances, what it really comes down to is, again, I'm looting the hell out of my existing customers. I'm burning them out. They are getting tired of even playing. I mean, why do I want to go there if it's this hard to collect just the latest issue of Spider-Man, the latest issue of whatever else? And what I'm hoping for is, just based on the aggregate of what I move, I can get a certain number of very high value comics that I can then again move on the web store, move as special things like that, that will pay for a lot of the nonsense of the dead copies that I won't be selling. So what it really comes down to is fewer and fewer copies are being sold. They're being sold to the same people, and they're being sold for ridiculous prices. And this is not the way to keep a market going. This is the way to kill a market. And I think we see this, as much as they're hiding the ball on the sales numbers. Easily you find people saying that, oh yeah, in the 1970s, the average Marvel comic was moving at a minimum of 300% of what they're moving today. I think that's understating the case dramatically. When you look at the sales on the things that we can easily track, like Amazing Spider-Man, it's at levels that would have the editor, the best-selling comic books in the field are at levels that would, have the editors being called into meetings saying, what can we do to juice this up? Because if it slips any further, you're getting canceled. And that's the high end of things. This is not good, guys. I would say a healthy market for comics. I mean, look, if you're a shop owner, do whatever you got to do to survive. But a healthy market for comics as an art form, as a hobby that we all want to collect and love and pass on to our kids and our friends, is one that is widely accessible, that doesn't cost a fortune to get into, where there's something that you can pass down, the love of the story, the love of the characters, and you can spread to as many people as possible without burning out the friendship in the process. You can't do this if you're treating everything like Kino numbers. Let me throw one more bit of bad news into this whole thing, just in terms of looking at how nuts this has gotten. Again, did a little analysis. This is the number of comics that have come out with more than 26 variants. So you guys might remember a number of years ago, and we go and switch to the right screen. You guys might remember that with ComicBase 2021, was it 2022? It was one of those ones fairly recently. We had to invent a new system for variants, because there were about a dozen comic books at that point that had gone more than 26 variants. And so when you had covers that were variants labeled A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc. through Z, once you got to the 27th one, which we had like Godzilla, Kingdom of Monsters, we didn't know what to do. So for a dozen or so of those, we abused the printing field. But eventually we came up with an extensible scheme that allowed us to say things like, okay, here's version 27 through gajillion if you have to. Let's have a look at where we stand in terms of, as of today. This is the number of comic books that have had more than 26 variants in their run. Amazing Spider-Man number 666 had 144 different variants. And by the way, these are not printings. These are all of first printings. Walking Dead actually would have had the most variants in history of this one, except that much of the other action on this one is that they actually went into multiple printings. I'll get into that in a bit. So if you put all their printings and their variants together, you wind up with like 160 copies, 160 versions of a Walking Dead number 1. Vampirella 7 series number, number 105. Do You Poo? No clue, guys. I didn't read it. I don't know what that is. God, I hope it's got something to do with Winnie the Pooh. 105, Dark Knight 3, The Master Race, 103, Batman 3rd Series, number 50 of all things, 103 variants, and it goes down from there. But look how long this list is. This is the number of issues that have had more than 26 variants as of today. And, if I run the numbers, next week, there might be a couple more who make the list. But I'm scrolling, and it isn't till number 317, Jungle Fantasy Fauna, which of course is tied with Jungle Fantasy Fauna number 2, number 1, etc., Harley Quinn's Villain of the Year, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, we've had 317 different issues over time that have run 27 or more variants. I'm just going to say, this is nuts. This is no way to run an industry. I'll put it this way. It's a great way to run an industry if you never want your customers to stick around for the long haul. And I think that's what we're doing right now. And I think most comic shop owners who are selling to new customers will tell you it's hard to get a new guy in the store, explain to them what's going on with things, and explain to them why they want to follow the adventures of that character they saw on TV, that one that their friend recommended to them, and why they should invest the kind of money we're asking them to invest to stay a comic collector in this era. It's a hard ask as that goes. Now, look, I want to be sympathetic to the publishers on this one, so I don't want to lay them out too hard until I know their side of things. Clearly, this is addictive from a publisher standpoint. You can see that by how quickly it's spiraled up, because they can't afford to give up the money that the variants now represent. I mean, when you're looking at the initial spreadsheet where you're talking about 1,700, 1,800 new issues being published every month, you had 500 issues you were trying to sell 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so you're trying to really, really goose the revenue on these ones. But even if you divide the circulation, or you multiply the circulation from the 70s by 4, you don't get divide by 4, you don't get to today's numbers. So they've also raised cover prices. The ad pages are nothing like what they were in the 70s in terms of how many outside ads are paying for each one of those issues, which of course is driving the cover price up, which basically leads the entire thing into a death spiral. There's got to be something done differently. I've been talking for a while. Let me take some comments on this one. All right, so let me see here. Jet City. Don't know what shocks me more, the number of variants for October or the close to 1,500 comics being published for October. Yeah, tell me about it. Greg, our moderator, regarding sales numbers, Publisher Weekly Comics Publisher Weekly's Comics podcast, more to come. It indicated there's some movement afoot to have an actual comic sales chart based on POS data from retailers. Yeah, I mean, it's a lovely thought. The downside is you can't measure you can extrapolate from data that's known, but if only a tiny fraction of the retailers are going to be throwing their stuff into the pool, then you're extrapolating pretty damned hard to get into that. Plus, I do think you need to ask yourself, I think we need to be more critical than we've been in looking at sales numbers to say, what are the characteristics of a retailer that would have certain commercial POS systems? In other words, is your local comic shop going to be laying out a couple $3,000 for the initial investment, terminals, et cetera, plus maintenance and upkeep to run a POS system, as opposed to whatever the heck they're doing right now? And I think it's going to skew the types of stores that you're getting your data from greatly, both in terms of quantity and also kind. And so I don't know how valid that sort of thing is going to be. Like I say, I'm reaching out to my sources pretty hard right now to try to get harder numbers on these things. What I've definitely got is a large generalized impression that new comic sales are not, they're you can't base a store on them anymore. Old comic sales are terrific, and nice thing is we've got lots of great data on those. That market's very, very strong. Not quite as strong as it was at the height of COVID, but pretty damn strong indeed. And that one we get to feed large amounts of that data in and compute that up, and that one is pulling fine. What I care about, though, in this regard is who are the fans of tomorrow, and whoever that is going to have to take a number. Okay. So I'm going to get back into that one later. I do want to go into a deeper dive on that one, armed with more industry numbers on that one. But I did want to throw the variance out there just because in case you were having a good day, I wanted to make sure I spoiled that for you. All right. So let me see what else we had here on a book scan. Let's see. Okay. And Greg has a lot of stuff in the comments. I'm not going to read it all, but yes, yeah, I think the whole trick on this one, and I've heard different ideas on how you might extrapolate something like that. I honestly haven't heard anything approaching workable for how to get broad-based market data that isn't self-selecting across a pretty severe axis in terms of it's either people who gravitate towards a certain type of book or a certain type of material or a certain price point of material. I'm not sure how I would crack that problem from that. The nice thing about this, on the other hand, is it does all roll up to the financials of Comcast, which owns DC, and of Disney, which owns Marvel. They know what they're selling. And it would be great if insiders there, if you wanted to drop a dime, I would love to get some further insight on that one, because I know you know. All right. So with that said, yeah, I think that's why all I want to say about how variants are killing comics for the moment. But like I say, I'm sorry, Comcast doesn't own DC. Am I getting the corporate ownership wrong on that one? Is it? God, I'm sorry, I'm blanking over. It was NBC, Comcast, Universal. Help me out, guys. Sorry, I at one point I had all the corporate ownership streams straight. Warner Discovery. Yeah, yeah, okay. I'm gonna have to decipher that corporate tree a bit. At one point, I had them pretty straight in my head, but yeah, that's right. It's because Warner broke off. It became Warner Discovery when they incorporated Discovery Channel, et cetera, et cetera. Right. Anyway, but yes, when you're looking at their corporate balance sheets on the whole thing, the guys in the different divisions, they know the answers. And again, if you even just look at the gross revenue numbers of what division they could be rolled up into on the corporate balance sheet, we're talking about fractions of a percent in terms of what the book comic sales could represent in terms of the overall media, the overall revenue for the company as a whole. That being said, for that little fraction of a percent, I, for one, care deeply about how it's going, because for whatever went wrong with our heads, I have a deep and abiding love for the actual comic books out there. It matters to me whether anyone has ever seen Spider-Man swinging across a printed page as opposed to seeing it in a movie, saw it on a T-shirt, saw it on on a ride at Universal, or saw it, on a lunchbox. It absolutely is a certainty that most of the money that rolls back to their corporate parents comes from the other things. But I care a lot about the comics, and so I want to know how they're being shepherded by their current owners. And if nothing else, I think it makes for a nice, interesting discussion to say, like, all right, if I ran, Marvel, or if I ran DC, what would I do? And I think the real answer is I'd get fired instantly, because most of the things I would do would be fairly fan-friendly, but would involve dramatic revenue losses on the comic books. Because one thing I wouldn't do is I wouldn't print 1,800 copies of a comic book with a $6 or $7 cover price and expect the same 50,000 fans to ingest it all month after month, because what you're going to find out is there's less and less fans month after month if you keep doing that. All right, so moving on. All right, so I'm going to try something here, and what I'm going to try to do, and I hope this works, so bear with me, is I'm going to try to make it so that there's at least one part of the show on every show that we do here, which is small and succinct and serves a point and doesn't get labored down with all sorts of digressions and stuff like that. And I have very bad record of pulling this off whatsoever, so I'm going to try it. Bear with me and wish me luck. So I'm going in. So with that said, here is Tip of the day today is going to be why your barcodes don't scan. Again, we're keeping on the doom and destruction view of life right now. And so we're going to talk about why it is that, even though you've got a wonderful barcode scanner in your hand, everything's going well with that thing, why the barcodes don't always come up. All right, so to demo this one, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up ComicBase, and I'm going to go down here under the items, and I'm going to say add by barcode. All right, now this is a feature of ComicBase Pro and Archive Edition, which allows me to beep in a whole bunch of comic books at once, which is really great for doing demos like this. All right, so I've got my little terminal up here, and I'm just going to grab my stack of comic books here and go down as fast as I possibly can. Now, last time I tried this one, it took me about, I don't know, 6 comics before I found one that was printed so badly that I got an error. And then before the show, because that's the way this goes, I scanned about 50 all at once, couldn't get a single error all at once. So we're just going to have to imagine, for the sake of this demo, that one of those comics did not scan in the way it's supposed to. All right, so let's talk about this. All right, when I scan in one of these comic books over here, and by the way, once I've scanned them all in, if I want to add them to my inventory, all I got to do is, hit save, and then boom, they're all in there. All right, same thing goes if I want the lesser versions of ComicBase. I just want to scan it and go to it right now. I just put the cursor right up here at the part where it says series name or barcode. I beep it in, boom, I'm there. And if I wanted to say I have 3 copies of this one, I just punch a number 3 on my keyboard, and there it is, and I'm done. All right, that's the way it's supposed to work. But what if it doesn't? All right, well, there's a couple of things that go wrong sometimes when you're scanning stuff in by barcode. Let's talk about what those are. So the first thing is, let's bust this down ever so slightly. Let's look at a barcode. So here's Batman number 0. And when we look at this barcode, you see its full barcode is 7619412000057, and then 00011. All right, so what is all this junk anyway, right? So most people think it's a magical code that just has all the information that says Batman, whatever else. Nothing of the kind. What this really means here is 61941 is the publisher code for DC. 20,005 is the code that the publisher made up for Batman. That's all that means. 7's just a check digit, and that's just to make sure that it picked up all these other digits, that it got, it computed them right. All the really interesting stuff for a collector's standpoint is in these last few digits, the 00011. All right, so let's look at what those are. So the 000, that thing is actually telling you the issue number. This is actually Batman issue 0. There was one like that. If it had been issue number 1, well, actually issue number 1 came out in, like, I think 1937 or so, or 1939. They did not have barcodes back then, but if it came out today, it would be 001. Would be its barcode. Now, for us, on the other hand, 000, those first 3, that's the issue number. The 1 after that is meant to be the variation number. Now, if you're following our previous segment, you probably saw that you can have more than 10 variations. So if you wind up with that, then these next 2 numbers aren't necessarily going to mean what they're supposed to mean. But officially, this next one, this is variation number 1. It's the regular cover. And the print one after that, the last digit, the last 1, is what printing it is. So the way you'd read this barcode is, all right, so from publisher 7679141, in series number 20,005, which is to say Batman, issue number 0, first cover, first printing. That's what that barcode is, if I knew everything about it. All right, so now let's talk about where it all goes wrong. Well, the people who invented the kind of barcodes that's used on comic books, it's called an EAN13 barcode. They wanted to be able to use that code for all sorts of things, including things like cans of soup and periodicals and watches and whatever else you might ever want to sell. So they made it very, very flexible. And they only added on these last 5 digits, which are called the supplemental. They only get added on for periodicals. And the whole code, unfortunately or not, is considered valid whether the scanner saw this part, saw the part with the supplemental on it or not. So the scanner doesn't know if it didn't happen to catch that, the 00011, if it all it saw was this first part, it doesn't know that's an invalid code. It'll happily beep and put the digits out there. The problem is, for a periodical, especially for a comic book, it's useless. It tells me, best case, it tells me, it's something from DC in series number 20,005. You have a issue of something. We don't know which one. And there's about 1,000 issues of Batman at this point. So that's not particularly useful for us. So what we do, if you happen to only catch the first part of that barcode, is we'll show you the part we got, we'll beep at you, and then we'll take it away. Basically, we'll give you a nice audible indicator that says, yeah, something went wrong there. In which case, it is actually very, very useful, if you are scanning things, to scan with the barcode, with your sound up. Because I don't know about you guys, but when I'm scanning, I've got my book here, I've got my barcode scanner here. My head is staring at the screen. I'm not looking at anything. I'm not looking at what I'm doing. I'm lining up the barcode. I'm scanning as fast as I can. The only thing that tells me I missed a scan is I hear bip boom when it misses. So it's important to be able to hear that bip boom if you have a problem. When you get the bibon, what that means generally is it means that the people who published the barcode took a little bit of liberty with the spacing on the printing of the supplemental. Sometimes, and it was really bad with the ones we tried last week, they publish it, they'll put the supplemental half an inch away from the main code. They'll cover it with all sorts of artwork. Sometimes they just use the wrong font, or they don't print the right resolution, and the whole thing just becomes illegible. So if you ever get half the barcode but not the whole thing, that's usually what's going on. Best thing to do in that case, pretty easy, take the scanner, pull it back a bit. In other words, don't put the scanner right on top of the code like this. Pull it back so it gets a nice view of the entire thing, and just try scanning it again. Most of the time it'll work, and just carry on with your life. If for some reason the barcode is so badly printed, go ahead and type it in by hand. It takes an extra second or two, but it's not the end of the world. And if it still doesn't come up and you've got it right, then it could be, and this is a lot rarer, but it could be that we just don't know the code. It's the way that we got where we got is we, over the course of time, we have assembled all the barcodes for every comic book that ever had one that we've ever known about. But that doesn't mean we've got them. It doesn't mean we've got them all. So if you double click on an issue, I just went to the far left over here, I just double clicked, you'll get to see down here at the bottom, here's the UPC. Sometimes there's an alternate UPC. Manga in particular is very fond of having multiple UPC codes. One will be inside the book, one will be on the back cover, and so forth. And sometimes it'll have an ISBN number or an ISSN number if it's a magazine or other type of periodical like that. We'll find it by any one of these that matches. And sometimes there'll actually be even barcodes that are used by more than one book, in which case we'll say, well, and this was very common in the 80s, the following books all have the same barcode. Before they came up with the idea of having 5 digits for the barcode, they actually used to use 2. And so instead of representing the issue number and then the variation in the printing, the 2 digits would just represent the month it was published. And so Captain America 189 and Captain America 201 would all have the same barcode because they all came out in like December or whatever else. But if that ever happens, we'll let you know, and we'll tell you, hey, there's 2 that match. Just pick which one's the right one. But if it doesn't come up at all, go ahead and double click on the issue, see if we've got the barcode. And if we don't, please do us a favor. Highlight the area you've got over there. Go ahead and beep it into your copy. And and then once you've done it, go ahead and bounce over here, hit save. I'm going to cancel for right now because I don't actually want that barcode because we did have that one in. But once you've got the right barcode and you've added it to your copy, please right click on that one and say submit new or corrected data down here at the bottom. What that does is it sends it to our editors, and then they will know that that's the barcode. If you had it, especially if you had like the barcode on a particularly rare variant or something like that we couldn't get the information from the publisher, very, very helpful. And so submit that to us, and by next week it'll be out in the update, and everyone else gets the benefit of you having stumbled across it. So anyway, that's about it. Thank you so much. And that is the tip of the day. All right. Cue that one up. All right. All right, so back to that. That was the one hopeful thing on this thing, and hopefully we can excerpt this sort of thing and use them as tips. That's the hope. All right, back to more doom and gloom. Um, next thing I want to talk about is why your computer is slow. By the way, other things I'm going to talk about if I get a chance before the end of the podcast is why you shouldn't upgrade your Blu-ray player's firmware and how to escape from a serial killer in a horror movie. So I have insights on all of these to share with you. So stick around to the end, especially that last one. It could save your life. All right. So why is your computer slow? All right. We get is the folks who run ComicBase. We get, because we're really some of the only people who actually pick up the phone when people call for tech support. So we get tech support calls that half the time ought to be handled by Best Buy. And one of the more popular ones on those ones is the, hey, my computer's running really, really slow. What do I do about it? And so forth. And so for civilians, so for people that, are just regular Joes who don't want to, spend a ton of time diagnosing, computer sub-processes and things like that, I just want to give you a couple little tips for where you can go to find out why some is slow. And to illustrate this, I'm actually going to use a little copy dialogue I had here, if I can put it up, from, this is me copying about, I don't know, 6 or 7 terabytes worth of data onto a Plex server as I was migrating some old equipment recently. All right, so, and this is probably The Sopranos or something like that. But one thing you'll notice about this particular one over here is look how straight that line is. This is the copy progress over time. You can, if you've got a copy going, you got a little arrow you can point at to give you the more details. This is the more details, and this is me having kicked this thing off at like 8 o'clock at night and just come back the next morning to see how it's finishing up. And that line is like a ruler almost, with tiny, tiny little divots in it. You will almost never see a copy performance line that is that straight. And that's actually why it makes this a really fun one to use as a demo for isolating, well, why that speed and not faster, or why not slower? In this particular case, let's have a look here at the task manager. The way you get to a task manager, by the way, is click on the start menu and type TASKMGR, or you can hit Control-Alt-Delete and it'll on your computer, and it'll pop up a list of options, one of which is Task Manager. If you do that right now, you'll see a bunch of stuff, a bunch of options right there. One of them will tell you what's running, and at the very top of that, you'll see the processes that were taking up the most space, both of your CPU, of your memory, and of your network. And if you'll see at the top of that one, you'll see that the CPU is pretty busy, but not 100%. It's not completely saturated. But over at the network, you've been riding 100% forever. And the really fun part, and this happens never, so I want to show it. This here's the CPU activity on that one, but let me look at, I don't have it, darn. But there was a network trace that I kicked into later on, which showed what the exact speed of the network was, and it was running almost exactly 847 megabytes per second. Megabits per second. Which is, if you guys know the speed of your wired internet connection, you will recognize is basically minus a little bit of background traffic, is exactly 1 gigabit per second. The way you get from bits to bytes is basically multiply by 10. Again, it's a little bit less precise than that, but when you are doing in theory, a bit is 8 bits is equal to a byte. But when you're talking about data transmission speeds, you're typically talking about parity bits and stop bits and start bits and so forth. But there's enough extra junk that they have to add into the transmission that multiplying by 10, it kind of gets you from megabits to megabytes. What do you tell now? How do I tell which one I'm looking at? If you're looking at a speed reference on anything on your computer, see whether or not the B is capitalized. So if I bust into Task Manager right now, let's see if I can do that. This is probably a bad idea, but let me see if I can put this on the other screen so I can do it. All right, so I'm going to pop this over here. switch my viewing monitor so I can see it. Okay. Oops. Wrong window, guys. Sorry about that. All right, let's pull the task manager up and move him to the right window. There we go. All right. So, and the nice thing about this one is if I turn on the magnifier, I can actually make this legible. By the way, the task manager, if you're ever wondering what's going on with your computer, just in general, that's always the place to start. TASKMGR, and we'll pull this up. Have a look at the processes. You'll always be shocked by how many things are actually running on your computer. But the next tab you want to go over here is performance, and performance lets you dial in on the individual things that are going on. Here's your CPU, here's your memory. Don't get too worried about your memory. Ironically enough, it's always the thing that they're trying to sell you at the store. It's almost always going to read as being very, very much in use, because Windows tries to do that. It'll use all the spare memory you've got laying around in order to speed other things. It's never actually critical on where it's very rarely actually critical, unless you're working with a very small system like 4, 8, maybe 16 gigs. Once you've got that much memory on your computer, unless you're doing something extraordinary, your memory is not going to be your gating factor. But have a look at your disks. If your disk is very, very busy, and right now I'm running a backup, and so yes, my eDisk is kicking over pretty good. And here's my Ethernet, which is completely saturated. You'll see it's taking a while to even scale down the scale and to even be visible. But yes, right now the thing that is the most pounded on my entire computer right now is the Ethernet connection, because again, I'm doing a big backup over a network. But yeah, so when you're sitting there and you're wondering, why is my computer slow? The steps, if it's not obvious, right? So if you don't know that you've got a big hungry program running that's taking all the space on everything, I'm sorry, and I should have I missed the opportunity to switch to the right monitor on this one. Apologize for that, guys. But here is the Ethernet on this one, if you can see that one at all. And here, if we go back to performance, here, as you can see, is the disk. Really not that bad. CPU, 27%. Piece of cake. 27%, your CPU is just happy. It's happy to be useful. When you see it at 199%, and if it stays there, then you're called being CPU bound. Nothing else on your computer is going to be moving until the CPU is done doing what it's doing. But typically your bottleneck is going to be either your disk, rarely your Ethernet, but it can happen. But usually your disk or the CPU are going to be the places where you will tend to be bottlenecked up. But the nice thing is, it's very easy to see just by clicking over here, looking at what's maxed out, and you can sort this list. If you click at the top here, if I click on CPU, it'll sort, very, very, it'll take a minute, but it'll sort the list by what's taking the most time on my CPU. You can see the Plex server I've got, running in the background is doing the most, Dropbox and so forth. Yeah, I can see what's taking the most memory. I can see what's taking the most disk, etc. And here's the backup process I was telling you about. And then you see the most network. And so you can see it's running a big, heavy, network push right now, which is backing up the whole computer. So that's all happening while we're doing the live stream. So that is how to most easily tell why your computer is running slow. Pull in Task Manager, play around with that one, and you will see where the big hogs are. But just want to show that one to you, because like I say, it was really kind of cool for once seeing a situation where the network was running at exactly the speed you would expect for a 1 gigabit network card. And at that point, you can tell the only way this will ever be made faster is to have a faster speed network card. Because usually if you're running like a hardwired network, you're almost never running at the full speed on that one. But that was just kind of cool to see. And yes, in case you guys are wondering, we are in the process of upgrading everything in the office here to either 2.5 gigabit or 10 gigabit for the backbone. So yeah, that's costing us a bit of money. So all right, moving on. Let's see here. Been babbling on here. First of all, notes from the mod. Please do not forget to haunt the like and subscribe buttons. Also, we have a dedicated forum in the threads, thread in the forum where you can request topics for the live stream. And also, there's links to, of course, Andre's world-famous Ouija board for conjuring up all the covers there in ComicBase. Which, again, if you ever want to see what all the covers in ComicBase look like printed this will tell you. All right. And let me see here. Oh, yes. And Steve Dazzler also would point another way, fast way to get to Task Manager is right click on the taskbar in an empty area. Yeah. So the taskbar, oh, you're thinking over here. That will take you to the Task Manager or the taskbar settings. And there's also another pop up on the right screen. So if I right click over there, you've got this little mini menu that will pop up. Sorry, come on, get to the right screen. There we go. This little mini menu that'll pop up. There's also a secret menu where if I right click on the start menu itself, it gets you to all the really kind of popular things for changing settings on your computer, managing the managing your devices and so forth. Worth playing around with that sometime, but just don't change anything unless you know what you're doing. But that is where a lot of the fun stuff on your computer is hidden. Andre says, Pete, go to 10 megabits. I'm on 10 gigabit 5 right now. Crazy fast and very cool. That would be great, Andre. We're riding the our ISP pretty good because they're talking about that in certain areas. They've rolled out multi-gigabit fiber. We're at 1 gigabit for the outbound connection for our servers right now to all y'all. We're working on them, but we're not there yet. But internally, when we need to move many terabytes of stuff around the house, it's like, yeah, I'd like it done as fast as everyone else. I mean, come on, it's the sort of thing we do around here. All right, let's get on to our last couple of topics on this one. Number one, why you shouldn't upgrade your Blu-ray player's software. So this is just a little story. As you guys know, I'm in the process of, while I'm doing everything else in life, is I'm migrating my various DVDs and Blu-rays and such to a Plex server, which is a nice way of streaming them around all the places I am. It was really cool. I was in Florida this last weekend, and I'm sitting there just on just your bog standard, got it from Sam's Club, smart TV, and I could access not only my whole music library from home, but I could stream, the movies I never got, I got for Christmas that I never got around to watching. I could watch them, from my couch in Florida. So it's kind of cool. It's kind of like running your own personal Netflix. Based, just on your own library. And unlike Netflix, stuff will never leave the service because the licensing expired or, somebody got mad at somebody elsewhere else. It's like your stuff is just wherever you are. It's also a lovely way. The thing that actually drove the whole migration to Plex is my music library, 30 some years or 40 some years of CD collecting. It used to be that I would have to buy a real phone with a ton of memory on it in order to carry that around with me when I would go someplace, because you want to be able to say, oh yeah, I'd love to hear that old Stan Ridgway track as I'm cruising across the Southwest, and you want to have your music with you when you want it. It's hard to ahead of time decide that I want this, that, but not the other thing, and you don't always have internet. But one thing you also don't have is, on modern phones, it's very rare to have a massive either SD card. Those have basically been going away from phones, and also if you go to like Apple or Samsung or wherever else, it's ruinously expensive to try to get a phone with 512 or a terabyte of disk space, or memory space. Gigabyte of memory space to store stuff on. So it's hard to carry around the amount of data you'd like in order to have a large music library. So the solution in that case turned out to be just a Plex server. So if I'm hosting my own server on Plex, I don't need to worry about syncing it with my devices. I can dial it up from wherever I am. Even with marginal internet, it does a pretty darn good job of buffering even. And again, I can listen to my stuff from anywhere. It worked out beautifully for the music, and then so I've been kind of involved with this process of moving the movies over. Which then brings me to the unpleasant discovery I made yesterday about Blu-ray players. So I'm using a software called, it's made by a company called Lewo. It's for ripping, essentially taking the content off my Blu-rays and encoding it and storing it on my Plex server. And I got to a bunch of 4K Blu-rays, and suddenly it was saying, yeah, I'm not sure if the firmware on your Blu-ray player is going to work with this one. I'm like, well, you've been working with everything else. What's your deal? And I didn't think about much of it at the time. But then later on, I thought, well, as I'm playing with mail servers and all sorts of other food that I was dealing with in life, I thought, well, gosh, now that you mention it, firmware, it's always good to have the latest firmware on things, right? So let me go and upgrade my firmware on my Blu-ray play on my Blu-ray reader. And so I did that. I went to the LG website, downloaded the latest copy of the firmware, went from version 102 to 105, took a couple minutes, great, restart the computer, and then it won't read any of the 4K discs at all. They weren't like marginal. It was just like, no way, no how, can't be done. This is an invalid volume. We will not let you read it. And then at that point, I understood what the previous message had been about. So the previous message was just triggered by some dust on the Blu-ray or something, making it think that, well, maybe there's a problem with the firmware. Then I went and upgraded the firmware and made it so there really was a problem with the firmware. And by the way, once you flashed your firmware to version 105 for the LG, it will not, repeat, not let you flash it back the other way. So, yeah, it still would allow me to burn my own drives. It still, filled its proper function. But in terms of being able to convert my existing 4K discs to a Plex server, I had effectively bricked my drive. Now, luckily, I've got a lot of other drives, and so did a little bit of surgery, pulled a drive out of an old server I wasn't using. That's identical. It still had the old firmware on it, and I was back in business. You may not be in the same kind of luck. So if you ever decide to rip your 4Ks especially, but your Blu-rays up to another media, stuff like that, be aware that the drive manufacturers have apparently added some kind of heavy-duty copy protection that has not been cracked to more recent versions of the firmware of their drives. So upgrading your firmware doesn't make your drive work better. It actually makes it work considerably less good. And so that is the reason you do not want to do this if you don't have to. I'm generally an upgraded kind of guy. Firmware, I'm a little bit more leery about because I've had one or two firmware things go bad in the past. I've never had a firmware effectively stop the drive from being useful for its intended purpose before. But that is an actual thing that can happen with Blu-ray drives. Buyer beware. All right, with that said, last thing I want to say, and I'm going to call this one the Kuntz rule, but in the spirit of Halloween, I'd like to share with you all how to escape from a serial killer in almost every horror movie. It's very short and simple. Have a gun. Think about it, guys. Last night I was watching back-to-back Death Wish from 1974, Charles Bronson, a mild-mannered, bleeding-heart liberal Paul Kersey. He's an architect. He's a civilized man of the person who's getting wilded on 1970s New York. His wife is murdered. His daughter is raped, and he decides that maybe this being civilized thing isn't working so well. A friend gives him a gun, and next thing, the whole rest of the movie, I'd actually remembered this one slightly wrong. I thought, well, he's a crazed vigilante. He's just going to kill people. No, the whole rest of the movie, he's still getting mugged. but what's different is that all the other guys from that point on don't know that he's got a gun in his pocket. And so when they try to mug him, he basically goes in with just absolutely uncanny marksmanship, shoots them all dead, causing all manner of trouble for the 1970s New York cops in the movie because they can't be seen as having a vigilante on the streets drop the crime rate where they've been so ineffective. So that was a bit of a blast from the past. But then passed forward to the next movie, which was a serial killer movie where called All the Little Things, with Denzel Washington, Jared Leto, and the Rami Malek, the guy from Mr. Robot. All great acting performances. And it seems like a movie it seems like it's going to be really smart, intricately plotted murder mystery. And then by the end of it, you kind of realize that this made no sense at all. But anyway, the other thing starts out with a woman driving home, and there's a car driving past her on the deserted highway, and it's being weird. It very aggressively passes her, and then starts slowing way up, and then she it stops dead in the middle of the road. She has to pass it, and then it goes for a while, and then it tears off like a bat out of hell to catch up with her again. She runs to a motel, has the lights on in the middle of the desert, hoping to find refuge. Of course, there's no one home. She's hiding from the whole thing. And as she is cowering behind things that are obviously not going to shelter her very much, her car trunk, bushes, random scrub in the desert, the killer is very calmly going into his trunk and pulling out some duct tape and a knife and a gun, and and he's just going to go hunting her for the rest of the movie, for the rest of this whole sequence. And all I could think of during this entire time is, if she had a gun on her, this would be an entirely different movie, and it'd be really short. I mean, it's not saying that she would win or anything, but she would go from being prey to being someone who could do something about it. And it got me thinking, if most of the horror movies that we ever see, whether they're Jason, whether they're, whether it's the guy from Halloween, whether it's the was it Voorhees, whether it's anyone other than maybe Freddy Krueger who attracts you in your dreams. I don't care if it's a psycho clown. You will notice one common aspect of almost all of these villains is that they're not bulletproof. It's just that no one ever seems to think, hey, I don't know, instead of running into the dark building or cowering behind that thing that can't possibly shelter me, or grabbing that wiffle ball bat or whatever the pathetic implement I've got as a 90-pound soaking wet woman, the pathetic thing I might do to try to save myself. If I were just packing a 44 and I just pulled it out and said, hey, let's see if this guy's bulletproof, I had the feeling that most horror movies would be much, much shorter. I'm going to call this one the Dean Koontz test, because one thing that he does very, very well, and I don't know a lot of other authors of, kind of like thrillers and fiction like this, is they don't account for the very obvious thing that most adults would do if they were trying with any kind of earnestness to protect their own lives, and that is to say, what if I had a gun? And one thing he does pretty well is he says, all right, well, let's live in a world where guns actually exist, and that small women can shoot very big men with guns, and it won't matter whether the guy was very big, and and he'll be just as dead. And then you have to then plot a story in which it makes sense of either why the gun didn't work, why she couldn't have used the gun, why you couldn't turn to the police, why you couldn't do any of the obvious things that an adult living in the world would do when faced with certain annihilation at the hands of an unstoppable force. So yeah, no, guys, I'm gonna say much, much chiller in life if you just have the ability, when you're on that lonesome road and you were passed by the serial killer and he decides to stalk you to the motel in the middle of the night, if you go to your trunk, pull out your concealed carry piece and get into a Weaver stance, I think you will find that your blood pressure level drops dramatically, and maybe he decides to move on to the next victim. So anyway, guys, tip you might be able to use, it might save your life. All part of the service here at the ComicBase Livestream. All right, guys, that's about it. We'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.